The air in the Shadow Moon Pact territory always carried a specific chill, a coldness that had little to do with the weather and everything to do with the people who lived there. For Sage, this chill was a constant companion, seeping through the thin fabric of her worn-out sweater as she scrubbed the stone steps leading to the main pack house. Her hands, red and raw from the soapy water, moved in slow, tired circles. Each scrub was a small battle against the grime and, though she didn't say it out loud, a small battle against the life she was forced to live. She was the Omega. The last. The lowest. In the world of werewolves, where strength and power were everything, Sage had neither. Or at least that's what everyone believed. Her rank meant she was the pack servant, the one who cleaned up the messes others made, both literally and sometimes, though they never saw it that way, emotionally. She was the invisible girl who fetched, carried, and bowed her head, a ghost in her own home. From inside the pack house, she could hear the sounds of life, the deep laughter of the warriors, the playful arguing of younger pups, the easy conversation of the betas. It was a symphony of belonging from which she was permanently excluded. A plate, half-eaten with a generous portion of roasted meat and vegetables, sat on the step beside her. It was her dinner, scraps from the main meal served to the rest of the pack hours ago. The food was cold now, the gravy congealed, but her stomach still growled at the sight of it. She would eat it soon once her work was done. "Hey, Wolf-less," a sharp voice called out. Sage didn't need to look up to know it was Bryson, one of Alpha Jax's favorite enforcers. She kept her eyes on the step, scrubbing a little harder, hoping that if she pretended to be deeply focused, he might just walk past. No such luck. His heavy boots came to a stop right in front of her, deliberately stepping into the bucket of clean rinse water she had beside her. "The Alpha wants the training grounds cleared of rocks before sundown," Bryson said, his voice dripping with mock importance. "Seems a storm last night kicked up a bunch of debris. Can't have our real warriors tripping during practice tomorrow, can we?" Sage finally looked up, her green eyes meeting his sneering face. The training ground was massive. Clearing it of even small stones would take her hours, and the sun was already beginning to dip below the tall pine trees that surrounded the territory. "But I haven't finished the steps," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "And the laundry from the kitchen is still." "You think the Alpha cares about your list of chores?" Bryson interrupted, kicking the bucket so that dirty water sloshed over her legs and the steps she'd just cleaned. He gave an order. "An Omega's job is to obey. Or are you too useless to even do that?" The familiar heat of shame warmed her cheeks. She dropped her gaze back to the step. "I'll do it," she murmured. "Yeah, you will," Bryson said. He leaned down closer, his voice a low growl. "And maybe while you're out there you can try to find your wolf. Though I doubt even the fleas would want to bite someone as weak as you." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and strode away, leaving wet footprints on the clean stone. Sage sat back on her heels, a deep sigh escaping her lips. She looked at the cold plate of food. There would be no time to eat it now. Wiping her hands on her faded jeans, she picked up the plate and placed it just inside the kitchen door, where it would be safe from animals. The hunger in her stomach was a dull ache, but the ache in her heart was sharper. The path to the training grounds was a well-worn dirt track that led away from the heart of the pack. With every step away from the noisy pack house, the world grew quieter, filled only with the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant call of a lone bird. This was the only time she ever felt a sliver of peace, when she was truly alone. Here no one was watching, no one was judging, no one was mocking. She found a large wicker basket and began her tedious task. Bent double, she moved slowly across the wide field, picking up small stones, twigs, and bits of bark, dropping them into the basket. Her back began to protest almost immediately, a dull throb settling into her muscles. This was her life. Endless, back-breaking work for a pack that wouldn't even spit on her if she were on fire. As she worked, her mind wandered, as it often did, to a different life. A life where she had a family that loved her. A life where she had a wolf spirit, a beautiful, strong wolf that she could run with under the full moon. A life where she belonged somewhere to someone. A single hot tear escaped and traced a clean path through the dust on her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with the back of her hand. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. It changed nothing. The sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The basket grew heavy with stones. Sage's arms trembled with the effort of carrying it to the edge of the woods to dump it out. She was so tired. So incredibly, deeply tired. She dumped the last load of rocks and sat down on a large, flat boulder, giving herself just a moment to rest. She wrapped her thin arms around herself, trying to fight off the evening chill. She looked up at the first stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky. She made a wish, a small, secret wish she made every night on the first star she saw. It was always the same wish. Please let there be something more for me. Finally, when the last sliver of sun had disappeared and the world was bathed in twilight, she decided the field was as clear as it was going to get. It would have to be enough. If it wasn't, she would hear about it from Jax tomorrow. She trudged back toward the pack house, her body aching, her stomach empty. The pack house was still bright and loud. A game was on the television and a group of warriors were cheering. The smell of a late-night snack, popcorn, wafted from the living room. No one noticed her slip in through the kitchen door. Her cold plate of food was gone. Someone had probably thrown it out, thinking it was trash. It didn't matter. She was too tired to eat anyway. Her room wasn't really a room at all. It was a small, damp storage closet in the basement, next to the rumbling furnace. There was just enough space for a narrow cot and a small crate she used as a bedside table. A single bare light bulb hung from the ceiling. This was her space. Her kingdom of nothing. She didn't bother to wash up. She just kicked off her shoes, pulled the thin, scratchy blanket over her shoulders, and curled into a ball on the cot, trying to get warm. The sounds of the pack enjoying their evening above her were a distant rumble, a reminder of a world that was not her own. As exhaustion finally pulled her into sleep, her last thought was of the stars. And then she dreamed. It wasn't a dream of running or of a powerful wolf. It was simpler than that. It was just a pair of eyes. Silver like moonlight on water. They were intense and powerful, but they weren't cruel. They were watching her. And in the strange logic of dreams, she didn't feel afraid. She felt seen. For the first time in as long as she could remember, in the depths of her lonely sleep, she felt a flicker of something that was not cold. It was warm. And it was focused entirely on her. The morning after her dream of silver eyes, Sage's reality snapped back into place with the sound of a fist hammering against her door. The thin wood rattled on its hinges, and the voice of Maya, the beta female, was sharp with a nervous energy that was entirely new. Sage. Now. Everyone to the main hall, immediately. Sage pushed herself up, the rough blanket falling away. The basement was still dark, the only light a gray sliver under the door. What was happening? It wasn't a training drill. The pack wasn't under attack. The alarm hadn't sounded. Maya's voice held panic, but not the kind that came from danger. It was the flustered panic of someone who's been caught unprepared. She pulled on her same worn-out sweater and jeans, splashed cold water on her face from the small sink in the corner, and hurried up the basement stairs. The main hall of the pack house was usually quiet at this hour, but today it was a whirlwind of activity. Warriors were moving with stiff, formal postures, their usual casual swagger replaced by a tense alertness. Younger pack members were frantically gathering stray cups, books, and jackets, trying to erase any sign of everyday mess. Alpha Jax stood in the center of the chaos, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His face was a mask of stern authority, but Sage, who had spent a lifetime learning to read the subtlest shifts in mood to avoid trouble, saw the tightness around his eyes. He was anxious. "You," he barked, his gaze landing on her like a physical weight. "Get to the kitchen. Stay there. Do not come out. Do not let yourself be seen. If I so much as catch a whiff of you, you'll be scrubbing the septic tanks with a toothbrush for a month." "Understood." Sage nodded mutely, shrinking back toward the kitchen doorway. She didn't need to be told twice. She was well practiced in the art of disappearing. Maya was in the kitchen, her hands fluttering over a tray of fancy pastries that had clearly been bought from a human bakery in town, not made here. "Oh, Sage, good," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Here, take these. Finish the silver polishing. And for the moon's sake, try to look busy. He'll be here any minute." "Who will?" Sage dared to ask, accepting the heavy tray of tarnished silverware. Maya stopped her frantic arranging and looked at Sage as if she'd just asked why the sky was blue. "The Alpha King, of course. King Corbin is making an unexpected visit to all the border packs. His convoy was spotted an hour ago. No one knows why he's really here." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Some say he's looking for someone. The Alpha King. The stories about him were legendary. He was the strongest of them all, the ruler who kept the peace between all the packs. He was said to be fierce in battle, just but merciless to those who broke pack law." Sage had always pictured a giant, scowling man on a throne made of bones, a figure from a scary story. The idea of him being here in her pack was terrifying. A ripple of excitement and fear passed through the house. Sage retreated to the farthest corner of the kitchen, next to the large industrial sink. She laid out a cloth and began polishing a large serving spoon, her movements mechanical. The abrasive cream smell filled her nostrils, mixing with the scent of baking bread from the ovens. She was a ghost again, part of the background, which was exactly where Jax wanted her. The sound of engines, deep and powerful, not like the pack's trucks, growled outside. The engines cut off. Doors opened and closed. A heavy silence fell over the pack house, followed by the firm, confident sound of footsteps on the front porch. Through the small round window in the kitchen door, Sage saw a glimpse of the arrival. Warriors in dark, crisp uniforms fanned out, their eyes scanning everything with a cold, professional efficiency. And then he walked in. He was not a giant made of nightmares. He was tall, yes, and broad-shouldered, filling the doorway with an undeniable presence. He wore a simple, dark shirt and pants, but the quality of the fabric and the way it fit him spoke of power and wealth. His hair was dark, his jaw strong. But it was his expression that held Sage captive. He wasn't scowling. He looked weary. His eyes, as they swept across the room, taking in the bowing form of Alpha Jax and his betas, were a cool, piercing silver. Sage's breath caught in her throat. Her hand, holding the polishing cloth, stilled. Those eyes. They were the eyes from her dream. The exact same shade of liquid silver, the same intense focus. A shiver, one that had nothing to do with the basement chill, ran down her spine. It was him. Jax was bowing deeply, his voice obsequious. Alpha King Corbin. Welcome to Shadow Moon territory. We are honored by your presence. King Corbin's voice was deep and calm, like stones rolling at the bottom of a deep river. Alpha Jax. I was in the area. I like to see my packs for myself, not just read reports. The tour began. Jax led the king through the main hall, showing off their trophies, their newly repaired furniture, their strongest warriors who stood at stiff attention. Sage pressed herself against the cool stainless steel of the refrigerator, trying to make herself smaller, to become one with the shadows. She watched him through the window in the door. He nodded politely at Jax's boasts, but those silver eyes were constantly moving, assessing, seeing everything Jax was not pointing out. The slight crack in the far wall. The way one of the younger warriors couldn't quite meet his gaze. He was seeing the truth of the pack, and Sage had a sudden, wild thought that Jax was a fool for trying to hide it. The tour moved closer to the kitchen. Jax was bragging about their food stores, their hunting successes. And our kitchen is always running, preparing feasts worthy of our pack status, he said, his voice too loud. Sage panicked. She ducked down, pretending to rummage for a cleaner cloth under the sink. The door swung open. She heard Jax's smooth voice. As you can see, everything is of the highest. A sudden, sharp command from one of the cooks. Sage. The tray. Now. They need more refreshments in the hall. It was too late to hide. Caught in a crouch, Sage had no choice. She grabbed the heavy tray of freshly polished silverware, the fruit of her last hour of labor, and stood up, turning to leave the kitchen just as the group was entering. Her eyes, wide with fear, met the silver gaze of the king. And then it happened. Her foot caught on a loose tile on the kitchen floor. She stumbled forward. The tray tipped. With a horrific, clattering crash that seemed to echo forever in the sudden silence, a dozen pieces of polished silver scattered across the floor, skittering in every direction. Time froze. Sage lay on the cold floor, surrounded by the evidence of her clumsiness, her cheeks burning with a humiliation so profound she wished the floor would swallow her whole. Jax's face was a thundercloud of pure rage. His hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. She had done exactly what he told her not to do. She had embarrassed him in front of the most important person in their world. You clumsy, worthless fool. Jax snarled, taking a menacing step toward her. But before he could reach her, a dark form moved. King Corbin stepped forward. He didn't look angry. He looked curious. He ignored Jax completely and knelt down on one knee amidst the scattered silverware. He was right in front of her. Are you hurt? He asked. His voice was quiet, but it filled the entire room. It wasn't the voice of a king addressing a servant. It was just a person asking another person a question. He reached out a hand to help her up. Trembling, utterly terrified, Sage reached her own small reddened hand and placed it in his. His hand was warm and strong, enveloping hers completely. The moment their skin touched, it happened. A jolt, like a spark of static electricity, but 1,000 times stronger, shot up her arm. It wasn't painful. It was awakening. For a single, breathtaking second, the world fell away. The staring faces, the scattered silver, the furious Alpha, it all vanished. There was only the feel of his hand and the intensity of his silver eyes looking directly at her, seeing her, not just the clumsy Omega on the floor. And for him, in that same instant, a scent hit him. A fragrance so delicate and intoxicating it cut through the smells of polish and food and sweat, wildflowers after a summer rain, clean and sweet and utterly captivating. His wolf, which had been calm and watchful, suddenly surged to the surface within him, let out a silent internal snarl of recognition, and then was gone. The scent vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him disoriented. The moment broke. Sage scrambled to her feet, snatching her hand back as if burned. She couldn't look at him. She stared at the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jax recovered, stepping between Sage and the king, his face a forced mask of apology. "My deepest apologies, my king," he said, his voice tight. "This is just Sage, our Omega. She's simple, clumsy. We keep her in the kitchens where she can't cause trouble. Pay her no mind." King Corbin straightened up, his eyes lingering on the top of Sage's bowed head for a second longer before he turned back to Jax. The moment of softness was gone, replaced by the unreadable mask of the king. "I see," he said, his tone flat. "The strength of a pack is measured by how it treats its weakest members, Alpha Jax." It sounded like a simple statement. But the way he said it made it feel like the heaviest of judgments. Jax's smile became even more strained. The king turned and walked out of the kitchen, his guards following. The tour was over. The door swung shut, leaving Sage alone on the floor, surrounded by the scattered silver, her skin still tingling from his touch, and the haunting image of those silver eyes burned into her memory. The silence in the kitchen after King Corbin's departure was heavier and more oppressive than any shouted insult Sage had ever endured. The clatter of the silverware seemed to still be echoing off the walls, a ghost of her profound humiliation. She remained on her knees, not moving, barely breathing, listening to the retreating footsteps of the most powerful werewolf in the world and the furious, silent rage of her own alpha. Jax did not look at her. He didn't need to. The heat of his anger was a physical force radiating from him, filling the room like a suffocating fog. He stood rigidly for a full minute after the kitchen door had swung shut, his back to her, his shoulders tense. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out, following his royal guest. The message was clear. She was so far beneath his notice that she wasn't even worth punishing in the moment. Her reckoning would come later, and that unknown waiting was its own special kind of torture. The other kitchen staff, who had frozen during the incident, now hurriedly went back to work, avoiding looking at her. They didn't want to be associated with her disgrace. Slowly, feeling as though her bones had turned to lead, Sage began gathering the scattered utensils. Each piece of cool, polished metal felt like an accusation in her hand. She had been seen. Truly seen. And by him. The memory of his hand, so warm and strong, sent another confusing shiver through her. He had asked if she was hurt. No one in this pack had ever asked her that before. The rest of the day passed in a blur of dread and whispered gossip. The pack was abuzz with the king's visit, dissecting his every word and expression. The general consensus was that he had been unimpressed, and the blame for that was being laid squarely at Sage's feet. She heard the words clumsy Omega and embarrassment muttered in the halls as she passed, head down, carrying a load of dirty linens to the washroom. She was given no dinner that night. It was an unofficial part of her punishment. The cook, under orders from Jax she assumed, simply looked through her as if she weren't there when she timidly appeared at the kitchen door at the usual time. The hollow ache in her stomach was a grim companion to the ache of shame in her heart. She retreated to her basement closet, the darkness her only comfort. Up above, she could hear the sounds of a feast. Jax was hosting a dinner for the king's warriors, a last-ditch effort to prove his pack's worth. The laughter and clinking of glasses were a world away. Sage pulled her thin blanket over her head, trying to block it out. She replayed the moment in the kitchen over and over. The feel of the floor under her hands. The shock in Jax's eyes. The deep, calm sound of the king's voice. And those eyes. Those silver eyes that had looked at her not with anger but with, what? Curiosity? Concern? She couldn't decipher it. It was a look she had no experience with. High in the guest wing of the pack house, in a room far grander than any other, King Corbin stood by a window, looking out at the moonlit forest. The dinner had been tedious. Alpha Jax was a blustering fool, his betas were sycophants, and his warriors were strong but poorly disciplined. It was a pack built on arrogance and fear, not loyalty and strength. It was exactly the kind of pack that festered and caused problems. But his mind wasn't on Jax's failings. It was on the girl. The Omega. Her name was Sage. Jax had said it with such disdain. Corbin replayed the moment in the kitchen with a precision that was second nature to him. The stumble. The crash. The fear in her wide, green eyes. It was a fear he recognized, not the healthy fear of a subordinate for an alpha, but the deep, ingrained fear of prey that knows it is about to be struck. He had seen it before in abused pack members, and it always made his blood run cold. Then the touch. The spark that had passed between them was undeniable. A physical current. And the scent. By the moon, the scent. For that one fleeting second, it had been the most captivating thing he had ever experienced. Wildflowers and rain. It had called to something primal deep within him, something that had been silent and lonely for his entire life. His wolf had roared to life inside his mind, not in aggression, but in a desperate, possessive need he couldn't understand. What? And then it was gone. Vanished as if it had never been. The scent had disappeared and his wolf had retreated, leaving behind a restless, aching emptiness. It made no sense. He had traveled to every corner of his kingdom, met countless she-wolves from powerful, noble families, and never, ever had he felt a reaction like that. Why would his wolf react so powerfully to a lowly, frightened Omega from a failing border pack? It was illogical. It was impossible. Yet, the memory of her small, calloused hand in his was seared into his skin. The image of her, looking so small and broken on the floor, wouldn't leave him. A protective urge, fierce and sudden, had risen in him when Jax had stepped toward her. He had wanted to put himself between her and her alpha. The thought was outrageous. An Alpha King did not intervene in the internal discipline of a pack without cause. But the cause was a feeling. A pull. A mystery he could not unravel. Down in the dark, Sage finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Her dreams were not of silver eyes this time, but of running. Running through an endless, dark forest, her heart pounding not from fear but from a strange, burgeoning sense of strength. She could feel the earth powerful and solid under her bare feet. She could smell the pine in the damp soil. It felt more real than her waking life. In his room, Corbin finally turned from the window. He couldn't sleep. The pull was still there, a faint, nagging thread tugging him downward toward the heart of the house. Toward her. He had a kingdom to run, treaties to oversee, a journey to continue at first light. He should be thinking of weighty matters of state. But all he could think about was the look in a lonely Omega's eyes, and the ghost of a scent that had, for one single moment, made him feel like he'd finally come home. The pre-dawn light was a pale, gray smear against the high window of Sage's basement room when the sound of engines roaring to life shattered the morning quiet. The king was leaving. The visit was over. Sage lay perfectly still on her cot, listening as the powerful vehicles rumbled through the packed grounds, their sound growing fainter and fainter until they were swallowed completely by the silence of the forest. A strange and unexpected pang of loss echoed in her chest. The world felt dimmer, emptier, as if a single bright star had passed through her sky and vanished, leaving the darkness behind feeling even deeper than before. The silence that followed the king's departure was not peaceful. It was the quiet before a storm. Sage knew it. Everyone in the pack knew it. The air in the main house was thick with a nervous tension, a collective holding of breath. The pack had been judged and found wanting, and a scapegoat was required. They all knew who it would be. She was right. The summons came less than an hour later. Bryson, his face a grim mask of satisfaction, didn't even bother to speak to her. He simply jerked his thumb toward Alpha Jax's office. The walk down the long hall felt like a march to the gallows. Every door she passed seemed to be slightly ajar. Every pack member she saw quickly looked away, not wanting to be connected to her fate. Jax's office was a room designed to intimidate. Trophies from hunts lined the walls, and his massive oak desk sat like a fortress between him and the rest of the world. He was standing by the window, his back to her, when she entered. He didn't turn around for a long time, letting her stand there, shaking in the center of the expensive rug. Finally he spoke, his voice low and venomous. "Do you have any idea what you did?" Sage said nothing. There was no right answer. He turned slowly. His eyes were cold, his expression one of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You made me look weak. In front of the Alpha King. You, a sniveling, worthless Omega, became the focus of his attention. He questioned my leadership because of your incompetence." "I'm sorry, Alpha," she whispered, the words automatic and hollow. "Sorry?" he spat, taking a step toward her. "Sorry doesn't fix it. Sorry doesn't erase the memory of you sprawled on my floor like a discarded doll. The king now believes this pack is incapable of controlling its most lowly member. That reflects on me. That reflects on all of us." He began to pace in front of her, a predator circling its trapped prey. "I should have gotten rid of you years ago. You're a stain on this pack. A constant reminder of weakness. But I am a merciful alpha. He stopped and smiled, a cruel, terrifying sight. So, I'm giving you a chance to prove your dedication. To prove you're not entirely useless. Sage's heart sank. She knew what was coming. It was always manual labor, backbreaking and endless. The old storage rooms in the East Wing, Jax said, his tone dismissive as if he were assigning her to sweep a hallway. They've been neglected for decades. They are full of junk, dust and probably rot. You will clean them. Alone. You will not stop for meals. You will not stop for sleep. You will work until every room is spotless, every box is sorted and every piece of trash is removed. Is that clear? The East Wing storage rooms. They were legendary in the pack. A sprawling, labyrinthine series of rooms filled with generations of accumulated junk. It was a tomb of forgotten things. It was considered an impossible task, a punishment reserved for the most severe offenses. It was a life sentence of solitary, grimy labor. Yes, Alpha, Sage said, her voice barely audible. Resistance was not an option. It would only make it worse. Get out of my sight, he snarled, turning his back on her once more. Start now. And so she did. The key to the East Wing was heavy and rusted. The door groaned in protest when she unlocked it, swinging inward to reveal a darkness that smelled of decay, dust, and forgotten time. Sage stepped inside and the door swung shut behind her, plunging her into a gloom so thick it felt like a physical weight. The work was every bit as horrific as she had imagined. Dust lay in thick, gray blankets over everything, swirling up in choking clouds at her slightest movement. There were stacks of mildewed books, broken furniture, crates of yellowed papers, and piles of rusted tools that disintegrated at her touch. Spiderwebs draped from the ceiling like ghostly curtains. Hours bled into one another. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs ached from the dust. She was thirsty, hungry, and utterly exhausted. But a stubborn spark within her refused to be extinguished. She would not give Jax the satisfaction of seeing her break. She worked with a grim determination, creating piles for trash, piles to maybe keep, and piles of pure filth. It was in the deepest, darkest room, a small chamber that might have once been an office, that she found it. Behind a collapsed bookshelf, half hidden under a moldy tarpaulin, was an old wooden chest. It was carved with intricate patterns that were obscured by grime. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. Driven by a curiosity that was stronger than her fatigue, Sage found a heavy metal pry bar amidst the junk. With a great deal of effort and a shriek of protesting metal, she broke the lock. The lid creaked open. Inside, protected from the worst of the decay, were a few precious items. A faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a smile that looked familiar. A small, silver hairpin shaped like a crescent moon. And at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of soft, protective doeskin, was a small leather-bound book. A diary. With trembling, filthy hands, Sage opened it. The handwriting on the first page was elegant and flowing. My dearest Sage, if you are reading this, you are finally old enough to know the truth. And I am probably gone. Sage's breath hitched. This was her mother's. She sank to the dusty floor, her punishment forgotten, the world outside these walls forgotten. She began to read, her eyes devouring the words written in a voice she could barely remember. The entries spoke of a great love, a secret romance with a powerful wolf from a distant pack. They spoke of a happy, hidden pregnancy. And then the tone changed. It spoke of fear. Of a dangerous enemy from her mother's past who had discovered her whereabouts and her child. I cannot let them find you, my little one. They will take you, or worse. My magic is weak, but it is all I have to give you. I have bound your wolf spirit, locked it away deep inside you. It will make you appear weak and omega. They will not want you. They will not see your true value. You will be safe. One day, when the time is right, when you are safe and loved, the bindings will break and your true power will shine. I am so sorry for the loneliness this will cause you. It is the only way. Sage sat in the dust and the dark, the diary clutched to her chest. Tears, clean and hot, cut tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She wasn't a mistake. She had been hidden. Protected. Her whole life, the very thing that made her an outcast was her mother's final desperate act of love. A powerful wolf spirit was sleeping inside her, waiting for its time to wake. She wasn't worthless. She was a secret. The world had fundamentally shifted on its axis. Sage sat on the dusty floor of the storage room for a long time, the diary clutched in her hands like a holy text. The grime, the exhaustion, the aching hunger, it all faded into a distant hum. Her mind was a roaring vortex of revelation and emotion. The truth was a key that had just unlocked a prison she hadn't even known she was living in. She wasn't an Omega. She was something else. Something hidden. A dormant power slept within her, placed there by a mother's love to keep her safe from a danger she still didn't understand. A fierce, new feeling began to burn in her chest, warming her from the inside out. It was a fragile, fluttering thing, but it was stronger than any emotion she'd felt in years. It was hope. Not the wistful, star-wishing hope of before, but a solid, tangible hope based on the words in the book. She had a purpose now beyond survival. She had to understand. She had to find out how to break the bindings. But first she had to get out of this room. The task Jax had given her was no longer a meaningless punishment. It was a cover. She carefully rewrapped the diary in its doeskin covering and hid it, along with the photograph and the hairpin, behind a loose floorboard under a heavy cabinet. This was her secret. Her truth. No one could know. If Jax even suspected she wasn't the weakling he believed her to be, his cruelty would know no bounds. She worked through the rest of the day and long into the night with a new, quiet energy. The dust didn't seem as choking, the work not as backbreaking. Every movement was now an act of defiance. She was not just cleaning, she was guarding her secret, protecting her future. It was late the next afternoon when she finally emerged, filthy and exhausted, but with her head held a fraction higher. She reported to Jax that the work was done. He barely glanced at her, dismissing her with a wave of his hand, already moving on to his next grievance. Her transformation was internal, invisible to him. She was still just the Omega. But the hope needed fuel. The diary spoke of her true power, but it didn't say how to unlock it. It spoke of being safe and loved. That felt like a distant dream. As the days fell back into their old pattern of drudgery and scorn, the brilliant light of her discovery began to dim under the daily grind of her reality. The pack's treatment of her had worsened after the king's visit, as if they were punishing her for his perceived disapproval. The hope started to feel like a cruel joke. What did it matter if she had potential, if her life was still this? A week after the king's departure, the weight of it all became too much. The constant insults, the cold shoulders, the sheer loneliness of carrying such a massive secret crushed down on her. Assigned to gather herbs at the edge of the territory, she found herself by the same stream she often visited. This time she didn't just sit. She wept. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the mother she never knew, for the childhood she'd lost, for the unbearable loneliness of her present, and for the future that seemed just as bleak, even with the secret she now carried. She cried until she had no tears left, her quiet sobs the only sound beside the babbling water. King Corbin stood motionless behind a thicket of birch trees, watching her. He had told his convoy to continue on without him. He'd told Ronan he was scouting the borderlands, a lie his beta had accepted with a skeptical raise of an eyebrow. The truth was the pull hadn't lessened. It had grown stronger, a constant, nagging compass in his soul pointing back to the Shadow Moon pack. Pointing back to her. He'd followed the feeling, moving with the silent grace that was his birthright, until he found her. And the sight of her, curled in on herself, her small shoulders shaking with the force of her grief, struck him with a force more powerful than any physical blow. His wolf, which had been restless since the day in the kitchen, let out a mournful whine within him. The urge to go to her, to comfort her, was overwhelming, an instinct he had never felt before. He didn't want to startle her. He stepped on a twig on purpose, making a soft crunching sound as he emerged from the trees. Sage's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. She scrambled backward, hastily wiping her tear-streaked face with her sleeve, expecting Bryson or one of the others to have followed her to mock her further. But it was him. The king. He stood there, not in his royal attire, but in simple dark clothes that made him look more like a warrior than a king. The fading afternoon light caught the silver in his eyes. He made no move to come closer, giving her space. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he said, his voice low and calm, just as it had been in the kitchen. Sage could only stare, her heart hammering against her ribs. What was he doing here? Was this a dream? Had she finally cracked under the pressure? She opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, to something, but no sound came out. Corbin took her speechlessness as fear, which it was, but it was also mixed with a bewildering awe. He slowly sat down on a large rock a respectful distance away, making himself smaller, less threatening. "This is a good place to think," he said, looking around at the stream in the trees. "Quiet." Finding her voice, Sage stammered, "My king? I should go. I'm not supposed to." "You're not supposed to be sad?" he finished gently, his gaze returning to her. "Or you're not supposed to be seen by me?" Sage looked down at her hands, clenched in her lap. "Both," A moment of silence passed between them, filled only by the sound of the water. The strength of a pack isn't in the power of its alpha alone, Corbin said, almost to himself. It's in the well-being of every single member. From the highest beta to the lowest omega. He paused. A pack that lets its members cry alone by streams is not a strong pack. His words were not an accusation aimed at her, but they validated every feeling of isolation she'd ever had. He saw it. He understood. A fresh wave of emotion threatened to overwhelm her, but this time it wasn't despair. It was the profound relief of being seen and understood by someone who mattered. "It's hard," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Being the last." "I imagine it is," he replied, and she could hear the genuine empathy in his voice. He wasn't pitying her. He was acknowledging her truth. They talked. It wasn't a long conversation. He asked her simple questions about the herbs she was gathering, and she found herself explaining their uses, her voice growing slightly more confident. He listened, truly listened in a way no one ever had. He didn't look bored or impatient. He just watched her, those silver eyes taking her in, and for the first time in her life, Sage felt like her words had value. As the sun began to dip below the trees, casting long shadows, Corbin knew he had to leave. He stood up. Sage immediately rose to her feet, her head bowing out of habit. "Look at me, Sage," he said softly. She forced herself to meet his gaze. He reached into a small pocket on his belt and pulled out a device. It was a small, sleek, black communication unit, unlike any radio the pack used. It looked advanced and expensive. He held it out to her. "This is a private line," he explained. "It connects only to me. If you are ever in trouble, if it becomes too hard, I want you to call me. Do you understand?" Sage stared at the device as if it were a live serpent. Accepting it felt like treason. If Jax found it, "I can't," she breathed. "You can," he insisted, his voice leaving no room for argument. He stepped forward and gently took her hand. Another spark, softer this time, but just as undeniable, passed between them as he placed the communicator in her palm and closed her fingers around it. "Keep it hidden. But keep it close." His hand lingered on hers for a second longer than necessary before he pulled away. "You are not as alone as you think you are," he said. Then, with a final, unreadable look, he turned and melted back into the forest, leaving her standing by the stream, her hand closed around the cool, smooth device, her world once again utterly transformed. The small, black communicator felt like a live coal in Sage's palm, radiating a danger and a promise that was almost too much to hold. She stood frozen by the stream long after King Corbin had disappeared into the shadows of the trees, her heart thumping a wild, erratic rhythm against her ribs. He had seen her. He had spoken to her. He had given her a way to call him. The reality of it was so far beyond the scope of her normal life that her mind could barely process it. It felt like a dream, a beautiful, terrifying dream from which she was afraid to wake. With trembling fingers, she wrapped the device tightly in a cleanish cloth from her herb basket and buried it at the very bottom, beneath the roots and leaves. It was her secret now, her second, even more dangerous secret. The diary was proof of what she was. The communicator was a tether to the one person who had looked at her and seen something more. She carried the basket back to the pack house with a new kind of fear buzzing under her skin. Every sound made her jump. Every glance felt like an accusation. She half expected Alpha Jax to be waiting for her, having somehow sensed the treasonous meeting in the woods. But the pack house was its usual self, noisy, indifferent, and utterly unaware that their lowest member now carried a direct line to the king. Days turned into a week. The communicator remained hidden under a loose floorboard in her basement room, next to her mother's diary. She didn't dare take it out, but its mere existence changed something in her. It was a tiny, hard kernel of hope. On the worst days, when the insults were particularly cruel or the work was especially backbreaking, she would think of it lying there in the dark. The king's words echoed in her mind, "You are not as alone as you think you are." But the pack, it seemed, was determined to prove him wrong. The change started subtly. The portions of food she was given grew smaller, sometimes skipped altogether. The chores assigned to her became more deliberately degrading, scrubbing the bathrooms with a toothbrush, cleaning out the dumpster area by hand. The mockery became less casual and more pointed, more vicious. It was as if Jax, still seething from the king's visit, had decided to systematically erase her from the pack, to make her existence so miserable that she would simply break and leave, solving his problem for him. Sage endured it. She clung to her secrets, to the memory of the stream, and endured. The breaking point came on a cold, rainy afternoon. She was in the laundry room folding a mountain of towels, her back aching. Alpha Jax strode in, followed by Bryson and a few other enforcers. His expression was cold and satisfied, the look of a man who had finally devised the perfect solution. "Sage," he said, his voice cutting through the humid air of the room. "We've been reassessing the pack's resources. It seems we're supporting members who contribute nothing of value." She stopped folding, her hands stilling on a rough towel, her heart beginning to hammer a warning against her ribs. "A pack is a family," Jax continued, pacing slowly in front of her. "And every member of a family must pull their weight. You do chores, yes, but so does a hired human. You lack the one thing that defines a pack member. You lack a wolf. You lack the strength to defend this family." He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes gleaming with cruel intent. "Therefore you have a choice. You can formally renounce your membership in the Shadow Moon Pack and leave our territory by midnight tonight. Or," he smiled, "you can prove your loyalty. You can prove you have the heart of a wolf, even if you don't have the spirit." Sage knew, with a cold certainty that settled in her bones, that there was no good choice. Leaving the pack meant being truly alone, a lone Omega in a world that was dangerous for the strong, let alone the weak. It was a death sentence. "How?" she asked, her voice a dry whisper. "You will undergo the trial of the wolf," Jax announced, and a few of the enforcers smirked. "You will face Kara in a formal challenge. In the circle. Until one of you yields." The air left Sage's lungs in a rush. Kara was a newly shifted young wolf, not the strongest but strong enough. She was fierce, arrogant, and eager to please Jax. She had claws, fangs, and the strength of her wolf. Sage had her hands. It wasn't a trial. It was an execution. A way for Jax to get rid of her without directly exiling her, making it look like she had brought it on herself. "That's not a fair fight," Sage said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Jax's smile widened. "Life isn't fair, Omega. The strong survive. The weak, well, they fall. So what is it? Will you run away with your tail between your legs? Or will you finally show us you have a shred of dignity and fight for your place?" The entire pack seemed to be holding its breath, watching the scene unfold from the doorway. There was no sympathy in their faces, only a morbid curiosity. They wanted to see what she would do. They wanted to see the spectacle. Sage looked at their faces, at Jax's triumphant expression, at Bryson's sneer. She thought of her mother, who had bound her power to save her. She thought of the king, who had seen something in her worth protecting. Running away would dishonor both of them. It would mean her mother's sacrifice was for nothing. It would mean the king was wrong. A strange calm descended over her. The fear was still there, icy and sharp, but it was now encased in a layer of solid resolve. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of running. If this was to be her end, she would not go cowering. She lifted her chin, meeting Jax's gaze directly for the first time in her life. Her green eyes, usually downcast, held a spark of defiance that made his smirk falter for a fraction of a second. "I will fight," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying in the silent room. A ripple of surprise went through the onlookers. They had expected weeping. They had expected her to choose exile. They had not expected this. Jax recovered quickly, nodding as if pleased. "Good. The challenge is set for sundown. In the fighting circle." He turned and strode out, his enforcers following, leaving her alone in the laundry room. The moment they were gone, the calm shattered and terror rushed back in. Her knees felt weak. She was going to die. Kara would tear her apart and the pack would watch and Jax would be rid of his problem. Her eyes darted toward the floor, toward the basement, toward the loose floorboard. The communicator. The king's words echoed, more urgent now. "If you are ever in trouble." This was trouble. This was the end. She had nothing left to lose. With a heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, Sage ran. She didn't care who saw her. She flew down the basement steps, slammed her door shut, and fell to her knees, frantically clawing at the floorboard. Her fingers closed around the cool, black device. She didn't know how to use it. There was only one button. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, praying to the moon that it would work, that he would answer, that it wasn't too late, she pressed it. The single, desperate press of the button on the communicator sent a wave of both relief and absolute terror through Sage. She had done it. She had called him. Now the terrifying question was, would he come? Or was it already too late? The device gave no signal, no light, no sound to indicate a connection. It just sat, inert and silent, in her trembling hand. Had it even worked? Had she just imagined the whole encounter by the stream? The crushing weight of doubt pressed down on her, almost as heavy as the fear of the fight to come. Above her, she could hear the pack gathering. The sound of feet shuffling, low, excited chatter, the grim anticipation of a spectacle. Sundown was approaching, painting the small basement window with streaks of orange and purple. The beautiful colors felt like a mockery of the violence to come. There was a sharp rap on her door. "Sage. It's time. Get out here." It was Bryson's voice, thick with impatience and glee. She had no choice. She shoved the communicator deep into her pocket, a hidden talisman against her thigh, and opened the door. Bryson grabbed her arm roughly and hauled her up the stairs and out into the central courtyard of the pack grounds. The entire pack was there, forming a wide, noisy circle around a flat, dirt-packed area known as the fighting ring. Torches had been lit, their flames flickering and casting dancing, monstrous shadows on the faces of the crowd. The air was electric with bloodlust and cruel excitement. At one side of the circle stood Kara, already shifted just enough that her claws were extended and her eyes glowed a faint yellow. She was stretching, a confident smirk on her face. Alpha Jax stood at the head of the circle, his arms crossed, a look of supreme satisfaction on his face. This was his design coming to perfect fruition. Sage was shoved into the circle, stumbling into the center of the dirt. The pack's jeers and catcalls washed over her, a wave of hateful sound. She felt small, exposed, and utterly helpless. Her eyes scanned the ring of faces, seeing only malice and amusement. She was alone. "The challenge is set." Jax's voice boomed, silencing the crowd. "Sage, the Omega, has chosen to fight for her place in this pack. She will face Kara. The fight ends when one yields, or can no longer continue." The way he said it left no doubt as to the outcome he expected. "Begin." Kara didn't wait. With a snarl, she lunged. She was fast. Her clawed hands swiped through the air where Sage's face had been a second before. Sage stumbled backward, falling hard onto the dirt. The crowd roared with laughter. She scrambled to her feet, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Again and again Kara lunged and swiped, not aiming to seriously injure yet, but to toy with her, to make a show of it. A sharp claw caught Sage's arm, tearing through her sleeve and drawing a thin line of blood. The sting was sharp and real. This was not a dream. This was happening. Sage did the only thing she could do. She dodged and weaved, using her small size to her advantage, staying just out of reach. She was buying time. But for what? A miracle. The hope that the king would suddenly appear felt foolish now, a child's fantasy. This was the real world, and in the real world, Omegas were beaten for the amusement of their pack. Kara, frustrated that her prey wasn't already subdued, grew more aggressive. Her next attack was a full-bodied tackle. She slammed into Sage, sending them both crashing to the ground. The air was driven from Sage's lungs in a painful whoosh. Kara pinned her, one clawed hand at her throat, not enough to crush but enough to threaten. "Yield, little Omega," Kara hissed, her breath hot on Sage's face. "Yield and maybe I'll let you crawl away." Sage struggled, but it was useless. Kara was too strong. The weight was crushing her. The claw at her throat pressed tighter. Spots began to dance in her vision. The roar of the crowd sounded distant, muffled. This was it. She was going to lose. She was going to yield. She had to. But then a sound cut through the noise. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was so foreign, so out of place, that it caused a sudden jarring silence to fall over the entire courtyard. It was the sound of a single, powerful motorcycle engine. It growled to a stop just outside the circle of light. Every head, including Jax's and Kara's, turned to look. A figure dismounted from the bike. He was tall, dressed in black riding leathers that clung to his powerful frame. He pulled off his helmet. King Corbin. His silver eyes, reflecting the torchlight, swept over the scene in the circle. They took in the pinned, terrified form of Sage, the triumphant Kara on top of her, the bloodthirsty crowd, and the smug Alpha. His expression, which had been neutral, hardened into something cold and deadly. A wave of pure Alpha power radiated from him, so intense that several pack members took an involuntary step back. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply walked forward, his boots making no sound on the dirt. The crowd parted for him like a sea, their earlier bravado completely evaporated under the weight of his presence. He walked right up to the edge of the fighting circle. His gaze locked onto Jax. "What?" Corbin said, his voice a low, controlled thunder that vibrated in the very air. "Is the meaning of this?" Jax, for the first time, looked genuinely nervous. He recovered quickly, bowing his head. "My king. A surprise. We are just handling an internal pack matter. A challenge has been issued and accepted." Corbin's eyes flicked to Sage, still pinned under Kara. This does not look like a challenge between equals. It looks like an execution. His voice dropped even lower, becoming more dangerous. Release her. Now. It wasn't a request. It was a command that brooked no argument. Kara, her confidence shattered, immediately scrambled off of Sage, shrinking back into the crowd. Sage pushed herself up onto her elbows, coughing, drawing ragged breaths into her bruised lungs. She looked up and her eyes met his. In his silver gaze she saw no pity. She saw a fury so deep it was glacial, and beneath that, a protectiveness that made her want to weep. Corbin turned his attention back to Jax, taking a step into the circle himself, now standing between Sage and the rest of the pack. You force your weakest member to fight for a place she was born into? This is the strength of the Shadow Moon pack? Bullying those who cannot fight back. Jax floundered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She has no wolf. She is a drain on our resources. I was just. You were ridding yourself of a problem in the most cowardly way possible, Corbin finished for him, his voice dripping with contempt. He looked down at Sage, who was still on the ground, watching him with wide, disbelieving eyes. He saw the tear in her sleeve, the thin line of blood on her arm. He saw the fear, but also the stubborn defiance that had refused to yield. And in that moment, everything clicked into place. The pull, the scent, the spark, the protectiveness, the way his wolf had roared mine. His entire being, every instinct he had ever possessed, focused into a single, undeniable point of truth. He reached down, his movements slow and deliberate, and offered her his hand just as he had in the kitchen. But this time his words were not just for her. They were for the entire pack. They were for Jax. They were a declaration that echoed into the silent night. His voice, powerful and absolute, rang out. You are wrong, Alpha Jax. She is not your problem. His silver eyes held Sage's, seeing straight through to the powerful spirit hidden within. She is my fated mate. The silence that followed King Corbin's declaration was so absolute, so profound, that Sage could hear the crackle of the torches and the frantic beating of her own heart like a drum in her ears. She is my fated mate. The words hung in the air, too immense, too impossible to be real. They seemed to suck all the sound and motion from the world, freezing the entire pack in a tableau of shock and disbelief. Sage stared up at him, her hands still suspended in the air, halfway to his. Her mind simply stopped working. It rejected the words. It was a trick. A mistake. A cruel joke the universe was playing at the worst possible moment. Fated mates were a legend, a dream whispered about in stories. They were for strong, beautiful wolves from powerful families. Not for her. Never for her. Alpha Jax was the first to break. A strangled, disbelieving sound escaped his lips. It was part laugh, part gasp. My king? That's impossible. She's nothing. An omega. She has no wolf. The moon goddess would never. Corbin's head turned slowly, his silver eyes cutting toward Jax. The look in them was enough to make the Alpha physically take a step back, his bravado evaporating. Are you questioning me? Corbin's voice was soft, but it carried a lethal edge that silenced any further argument. Are you questioning the will of the moon goddess? Jax's mouth snapped shut, his face pale. To question a fated mate bond was the highest blasphemy. To question the Alpha King's word was treason. Corbin's gaze returned to Sage, and his expression softened infinitesimally. His hand was still extended, waiting. Sage, he said, her name a quiet command and a plea all at once. Trembling, her body aching from the fight, her mind reeling, she finally placed her small, dirty hand in his. The moment their skin connected, it happened again. The spark. But this time it was different. It wasn't a fleeting jolt. It was a surge of pure, undiluted energy that exploded from the point of contact and raced through her entire body. It was a key turning in a lock that had been sealed for a lifetime. A warmth, fierce and glorious, bloomed in the very center of her chest, spreading outwards through her veins like liquid sunlight. It was a feeling of rightness, of coming home, of a missing piece of her soul slotting into place with such force it was almost painful. The hidden, bound part of her that she had only just learned about from the diary began to stir, to stretch, to awaken. And then the power erupted. It was not a gentle unfolding. It was a detonation. A shockwave of pure, raw energy blasted outwards from her body, invisible but tangible. It hit the surrounding pack members like a physical force, knocking several of them off their feet. The torches flickered and roared, their flames stretching towards the sky as if in homage. The air itself began to hum, charged with a power so ancient and potent it made the hair on everyone's arms stand on end. Sage gasped, her back arching as a sensation of incredible strength flooded her. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. The aches from the fight vanished. The fatigue from a lifetime of labor disappeared. She felt new. Oh. A collective gasp rippled through the pack, this one filled with a new kind of fear, awe. They stared at her, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. The weak, clumsy Omega was gone. In her place stood a woman radiating a power that dwarfed anything any of them had ever felt, including Alpha Jax. Jax himself looked like he had seen a ghost. His jaw was slack, his eyes bulging. He stared at Sage as if she were a monster that had just shed a familiar skin. The pathetic creature he had tormented for years was emanating a force that made his own alpha power feel like a faint candle next to a blazing sun. The truth was undeniable, and it was destroying his entire worldview. Corbin watched it happen, his hand still firmly holding hers. There was no surprise on his face, only a deep, satisfied certainty. He had known. On some level, from the very first moment he'd scented her, he had known she was extraordinary. This power, this glorious, terrifying energy, was his mate's true self. The bond between them, now acknowledged and accepted, had been the final key to shatter the magical binds her mother had placed. Sage's eyes, wide and shocked, found his. The green was brighter, more intense, shimmering with unshed tears and unleashed power. What's happening to me?" she whispered, her voice trembling, but now with a new depth, a new resonance. "The truth," Corbin said, his voice thick with pride and a possessiveness that felt ancient and right. "Your truth." The awakening power began to stabilize, settling into her bones, humming just beneath her skin. She was still herself, Sage, but she was also so much more. She could feel the world around her with a new clarity, the heartbeat of every person in the courtyard, the rustle of leaves in the distant trees, the steady, strong pulse of the man holding her hand. Corbin finally turned his attention back to Jax, who was still staring, pale and shaken. The king's expression was no longer just angry, it was judgmental and final. "You cast out a diamond because you were too blind to see past the dust," Corbin said, his voice ringing with authority. "You abused the greatest treasure your pack could ever have possessed. For this, you are not fit to lead." He raised his voice, addressing the entire stunned pack. "Alpha Jax is hereby stripped of his title and his rank. He will be taken to the royal dungeons to await trial for his cruelty and neglect." He gestured to two of his own guards, who had materialized from the shadows. They moved forward and took an unresisting Jax by the arms. Corbin's gaze then swept over the rest of the pack, who were looking at Sage with a new, fearful respect. "The Shadow Moon pack will be placed under the direct protection of the crown until a new, worthy alpha can be appointed." Finally he looked down at Sage. The power still radiated from her, a visible aura of potential that made the very air around her shimmer. His voice softened, becoming for her ears only. "And you," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "You are coming home with me." The journey from the Shadow Moon territory to the royal palace was a blur of sensation and surreal stillness for Sage. She sat in the plush, silent interior of the king's luxury SUV, watching the dark forests and sleeping human towns whip past her window. Ronan, the king's beta, was driving, his posture stiff and his occasional glances in the rearview mirror filled with a new, wary respect. In the seat beside her, King Corbin was a solid, quiet presence. He didn't try to fill the silence with empty words. He seemed to understand that her world had been cracked open and remade in the span of an hour, and that she needed the quiet to try and piece it all together. Her body still hummed with the aftermath of the power that had erupted from her. It wasn't a violent surge anymore, but a deep, thrumming current flowing just beneath her skin, a sleeping giant that was now awake and breathing. She could feel the leather of the seat, the vibration of the engine, the individual threads in the blanket Corbin had wordlessly draped over her lap. Her senses were dialed to an intensity she had never known was possible. She could smell the pine from the forest, the clean scent of Corbin's soap, the faint aroma of leather and polish from the car's interior, all separately, all clearly. And she could feel him. Corbin. It was the strangest sensation of all. It wasn't a physical touch, but an awareness. A warm, steady pulse in the back of her mind, a comforting weight that felt like an anchor in the storm of her new reality. It was the mate bond. A connection she had only heard about in stories, now thrumming between them, real and undeniable. Every so often she would sneak a glance at his profile, lit by the dashboard lights. He was handsome, yes, but it was the quiet strength in him, the unwavering certainty he had shown in the circle, that made her feel safe. They arrived at the palace as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. It wasn't a castle from a fairy tale with turrets and moats, but a breathtaking, modern structure of glass and stone built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a vast, pristine lake. It spoke of immense power but also of elegance and grace. As the car passed through the secure gates and swept up the long driveway, Sage's breath caught in her throat. This was his home. And he had said it was now her home too. Servants in crisp, discreet uniforms were waiting at the entrance. They bowed deeply as Corbin helped her out of the car. Their eyes flickered to her with curiosity, but their training was impeccable. They showed no reaction to her worn clothes or her overwhelmed expression. "Ronan, see to the arrangements for the Shadow Moon pack. I want a full report by noon," Corbin said, his voice all business, yet his hand remained gently on the small of Sage's back, a steadying point of contact. "Of course, my king," Ronan said with a bow, shooting one last unreadable look at Sage before striding away. Corbin led her inside. The interior was vast and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the stunning lake view. The furnishings were minimalist and expensive, everything clean lines and quiet luxury. It was the complete opposite of the noisy, cluttered wood and stone pack house she had known her whole life. It was beautiful, but it felt like a museum. It didn't feel like a home. He took her to a suite of rooms. The doors swung open to reveal a sitting room, a bedroom bigger than the entire basement she'd lived in, and a bathroom with a sunken marble tub. A wall of windows looked out over the water, where the sun was now beginning to rise, setting the lake on fire with orange and gold light. "These are your rooms," Corbin said, his voice softer now that they were alone. "You can change anything you like. Whatever makes you comfortable." Sage just stood in the center of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. The grandeur was oppressive. The silence was deafening. The weight of everything, the fight, the revelation, the journey, this new impossible reality, crashed down on her all at once. The strong, powerful woman who had emerged in the circle receded, and the scared, overwhelmed Omega surfaced. A single, traitorous tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. Then another. She tried to turn away to hide it, ashamed of her weakness in this place of strength. But Corbin saw. He always saw her. He didn't sigh or tell her it would be okay. He simply stepped closer and gently wiped the tear away with his thumb. His touch was incredibly warm against her skin. "It's too much," she whispered, her voice breaking. "All of it. This place, you, what I am. I don't know how to be this." She gestured vaguely at the room, at him, at herself. "You don't have to know how," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You just have to be Sage. The rest will come." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look up at him. His silver eyes were serious, filled with an emotion so deep it made her breath catch. "What you felt back there, the power, that is who you have always been. The world just couldn't see it. But I could. I always could." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. The mate bond between them seemed to vibrate, humming with a rightness that soothed her frayed nerves. She could feel his breath on her lips, could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart. "You are not alone anymore," he whispered, his words a promise. "You will never be alone again." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a demanding kiss or a rushed one. It was slow and deep-ending. It was a kiss of claiming, yes, but also of welcome. Of homecoming. It tasted of promise and of a future she had never dared to dream of. The world, with all its overwhelming newness, shrank down to just this single point of contact. The hum of her power within her seemed to still, focusing entirely on the feel of his lips on hers, the warmth of his hands on her face, the solid strength of his body against hers. It was her first kiss. And it felt like a beginning. The days that followed Sage's arrival at the palace were a lesson in a new kind of life, a slow and gentle unraveling of the tight knots of fear and tension she had carried for so long. No one shouted at her. No one handed her a list of back-breaking chores. The servants, under the king's explicit instruction, treated her with a deference that was initially bewildering. They called her Miss Sage, and asked politely if she needed anything, their eyes carefully avoiding any judgment of the girl who had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a power that had shaken the very foundations of their world. Her new rooms became her sanctuary. Slowly, tentatively, she began to make them her own. She asked for a few plants, and a small indoor garden appeared by the sunny window. She mentioned she liked to read, and a librarian arrived with a cart of books for her to choose from. It was the simplest of things, but to Sage the ability to choose felt like the most incredible luxury. She would spend hours curled on the plush sofa, reading or simply staring out at the ever-changing surface of the lake, learning the rhythms of her new home. And she learned the rhythms of Corbin. His life was a whirlwind of duty, Meetings with advisors, disputes to settle from across his territory, security briefings. But he carved out time for her. Every day without fail he would come to her. Sometimes it was for a walk through the palace's vast, private gardens. Sometimes it was for a quiet dinner on her balcony, just the two of them. He talked to her, not at her. He asked her opinions on pack laws, on stories from history, and he listened, truly listened, to her answers. He was teaching her, without ever saying it, how to think like a leader. But the most profound changes were happening within. The power that had erupted so violently during her awakening had settled into a constant, warm hum in her chest, a sleeping dragon that was now a part of her. She could feel it, sense its potential, but she had no idea how to control it. It was like being given the keys to a magnificent, powerful car without being taught how to drive. One evening, as they walked along the lakeshore, the full moon hanging heavy and bright in the sky, she finally confessed her fear. "I can feel it," she said, her voice soft against the lapping of the water. "This thing inside me. It's amazing, but it's also scary. What if I can't control it? What if it comes out at the wrong time and I break something?" She looked up at him, her green eyes wide with vulnerability. "What if I disappoint you?" Corbin stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. The moonlight silvered his hair and cast his handsome features in sharp relief. "You could never disappoint me," he said, his voice firm. "This power is a part of you, Sage. It's not a separate thing to be controlled. It's your strength, your spirit finally free. You don't command it. You learn to work with it. To trust it as it trusts you." He led her to a flat, open area of grass away from the palace. "Close your eyes," he instructed gently. "Don't try to feel the power. Just feel everything else. The wind on your skin. The sound of the water. The smell of the night air. The moon above us." Sage did as she was told, closing her eyes. She let the sensations of the night wash over her, pushing aside the anxiety about the power within. "Now," Corbin's voice was a soft murmur beside her. "Feel for me. Find our bond. Can you feel it?" She focused inward, past the night sounds, past her own breathing. And there it was. A golden thread of connection, warm and steady, leading from her heart to his. It was always there, a constant comfort. "I feel it," she whispered. "Good," he said. "Now imagine that thread. Imagine sending a little bit of that feeling, that warmth, that connection, down through your feet into the earth." It was a strange request, but she tried. She pictured the golden light of their bond flowing down her legs, like roots seeking soil. And as she did, something incredible happened. She could feel it. Not just in her imagination, but for real. A faint, answering warmth from the deep, dark earth beneath her feet. It was solid, ancient, and immensely powerful. It felt like greeting an old friend. A soft gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes flew open. Corbin was smiling, a real, full smile that lit up his entire face. "You see? You're not alone. Your power is connected to everything. To the earth, to the moon." His silver eyes held hers. "And to me. You will learn. We will learn together." In that moment, under the vast, starry sky, with the earth's energy humming beneath her feet and her fated mate's hand firmly in hers, Sage finally believed it. She wasn't an imposter in a palace. She wasn't a weakling who had stumbled into a fairy tale. The lonely Omega was gone, not replaced, but transformed. Forged in the fire of hardship and revealed by the courage to finally stand up, she was something new. She was Sage, the fated mate of the Alpha King. She was powerful. She was loved. And she was finally, unquestionably, home. Her journey from the scorned Omega to the future Luna Queen had reached its beautiful, breathtaking beginning. But every great love story has more chapters to tell, more challenges to face, and more secrets to uncover. The bond is sealed, but their reign is just beginning. If you want to be there to witness every thrilling moment of Sage and Corbin's story, to see her master her incredible power and stand beside her king as the Luna they were always destined to be, make sure to subscribe for the next unforgettable chapter.